Hey everybody, Superfly Gaming here, back for another episode of Retroware. In this one we're going to be looking at a cult classic, Metal Gear Solid 1. A game that has absolutely defined an entire genre and dominated the game charts for a very long time. We're going to pick up where it first started out in Metal Gear Solid 1, the sequel to Metal Gear 1 and Metal Gear 2. Metal Gear Solid is an action-adventure stealth video game developed and published by Konami for the PlayStation in 1998. As you probably well know, it was directed, produced and written by Hideo Kojima and is a sequel to the video games Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, which Kojima also worked on the MSX2 console. It was first unveiled at the 1996 Tokyo Game Show and then had demonstrations at E3 and the Electronic Entertainment Expo in 1997. It was originally planned for 1997 release, but it was delayed to 1998. We, the player, control Solid Snake, who infiltrates a nuclear weapons facility to neutralize the terrorist threat from Foxhound, which is a renegade special forces unit. Snake has to liberate hostages and stop the terrorists from launching a nuclear strike. The game is incredibly cinematic and is rendered using in-game engine and graphics, with extensive voice acting throughout. Metal Gear Solid sold more than 7 million copies worldwide and it shipped 12 million demos. I myself remember encountering it for the first time in 1997 on a European demo disc, and it absolutely blew me and my friends away at how awesome we thought it was. It scored an average of 94 out of 100 on the aggregate website Metacritic. It's also regarded as one of the greatest and most important video games of all time. It helped popularize the stealth genre and in-engine cinematic cutscenes. It was of course followed by an expanded version for the PlayStation and Windows called Metal Gear Solid Integral 1999, which of course includes the VR missions. It had a GameCube remake called the Twin Snakes in 2004. It produced numerous sequels, which of course started with Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty in 2001, and media adaptations including radio drama, comics and novels. The player must navigate the protagonist, which is Solid Snake, through the nuclear weapons facility without being detected by enemies, hence the stealth aspect of the game. When Snake moves into an enemy's field of vision, he sets off the alert mode that draws enemies towards him, and he must hide until eventually the evasion mode begins, where the music changes, implying that there's a very strong ambient feeling to the game. It's very dynamic music, especially if you've played it, you'll know what I'm talking about. It really helps build the tension. The radar cannot be used in alert or evasion mode, and in addition to the stealth gameplay, set-piece sequences entail firefights between the player and enemies. To remain undetected, the player can perform techniques which make use of Snake's abilities and the environment, such as crawling under objects using boxes as cover, ducking or hiding around walls, and making noise to distract enemies. The on-screen Soliton radar provides the player with the location of nearby enemies and their field of vision, as well as security cameras. Snake can also make many uses of the other items in the game and gadgets, such as the infrared goggles and a cardboard box disguise. The emphasis on stealth promotes a less violent form of gameplay, as fights against large groups of enemies will often result in severe damage to Snake. But of course, as you go on through the game, the health bar will increase subsequently with each boss that you defeat. Despite the switch to 3D, the game is still played primarily from an overhead perspective, similar to the original 2D Metal Gear games. However, the camera angle will change during certain situations, such as corner views, when Snake flattens himself against the wall to an open space, or when you go into first person, or crawling under tight spaces, as well as, of course, using the binoculars and sniper rifle. You can also use the first person view while remaining idle to look around Snake's surroundings and see what's ahead of him. The plot for Metal Gear Solid takes place in an alternate history in which the Cold War continued into the 90s, ending at some point near the end of the 20th century. The game's events takes place 6 years after those in the downfall of Zanzibar land, and from the third chapter in an overarching plot concerning the character of Solid Snake. The protagonist is Solid Snake, a legendary infiltrator and saboteur, and during the mission Snake receives support and advice via a codec radio. Colonel Campbell, Solid Snake's former commanding officer, supports Snake with information and tactics. While he initially keeps some secrets from Snake, he gradually reveals them. He is joined by Naomi Hunter, who gives medical advice, Nastasha Romanenko, who provides item and weapons tips, Master Miller, a former drill instructor and survival coach, and Mei Ling, who invented the Soliton radar system used in the mission and is also in charge of mission data. The player can call her to save the game, and she will give little quips every now and again and quotes. The main antagonist of the game is Liquid Snake, leader of a new terrorist splinter cell of the organization Foxhound, a genetic counterpart to Solid Snake. An elite special forces unit, Foxhound, contains experts specializing in different tasks. Members are Revolver Ocelot, a Western-style gunslinger and expert interrogator, whose weapon of choice is the Colt single-action army. Sniper Wolf, a preternatural sniper. Vulcan Raven, a hulking Alaskan shaman, armed with an M61 Vulcan torn from a downed F-16. Psycho Mantis, a psychic profiler and psychokinesis expert. And Decoy Octopus, a master of disguise. Other characters include Meryl Silverburn, Colonel Campbell's niece and rookie soldier stationed in Shadow Moses who did not join the revolt, Dr. Hal Emmerich, the lead developer of Metal Gear Rex, and the Ninja, a mysterious cybernetically enhanced agent who is neither an ally nor an enemy of Snake, but does oppose Foxhound. The story for Metal Gear Solid is set in 2005, when a renegade genetically enhanced special forces unit Foxhound seizes control of a remote island in Alaska's Fox archipelago codenamed Shadow Moses, which houses a nuclear weapons disposal facility. Foxhound threatens to use the nuclear-capable mecha Metal Gear Rex, being secretly tested at the facility against the US government, if they do not receive the remains of Big Boss and a ransom of $1 billion within 24 hours. Solid Snake is forced out of retirement by Colonel Campbell to infiltrate the island and neutralize the threat. Snake enters the facility via an air vent and locates the first hostage, the DARPA chief Donald Anderson. Anderson reveals that the Metal Gear Rex can be deactivated with a secret detonation override code, but dies of a heart attack. Colonel Campbell's niece, Meryl Silverburn, held hostage in a neighboring cell nearby, helps Snake escape. Snake locates another hostage, the Arms Tech president Kenneth Baker, and is then confronted by Foxhound member Revolver Ocelot. The game continues from there. I won't give too many spoilers, but it creates an entirely immersive experience that the player gets involved in and really draws you in once you get invested a lot of time into that game. As for the development, Kojima originally planned his third Metal Gear game in 1994 for the 3DO interactive multiplayer. Hideo was initially planning Metal Gear Solid while Policenauts in 1994 was still in development. Conceptual artwork by Yoji Shinkawa of the characters Solid Snake and Meryl Silverburn, who were also as a character in the adventure game Policenauts. And the Foxhound team were included in the Policenauts pilot disc preceding the release of the full version of the 3DO game in 1995. However, as the 3DO was discontinued, development shifted to the PlayStation after Policenauts was released. The title of the game, of course, was released as Metal Gear Solid rather than Metal Gear 3, as Kojima felt that the previous MSX2 games that he worked on were not widely known due to the fact that they were not released in North America, and only the first one was released in Europe, which was a NES version of the Metal Gear game that was released in North America, but Kojima had no involvement with or its sequel, Snake's Revenge. The word Solid, derived from the codename of the series protagonist Solid Snake, as well as the title of the second MSX2 game, was chosen not to represent the fact that it was the third entry of the series, but a tradition from the traditional 2D to 3D computer games. Considering first-person games that were difficult to control, the team opted to give the gameplay a 2D style by having it predominantly played from an overhead angle while using 3D graphics and the ability to switch to first person on the fly to make it feel as though the game were taking place in a real 3D world. Development for Metal Gear Solid began in mid-1995, and developers aimed for accuracy and realism while making the game enjoyable and tense. In the early stages of the development, the Huntington Beach SWAT team educated the creators with a demonstration of vehicles, weapons, and explosives. Weapons expert Motosadi Mori was also tapped as a technical advisor in the research, which included visits to Fort Irwin and firing sessions at Stembridge gun rentals. Kojima stated that, quote, "If the player isn't tricked into believing that the world is real, then there's no point in making the game," unquote. To fulfill this, adjustments were made to every detail, such as individually designed desks. The character and mecha designs were made by artist Yoji Shinkawa, based on Kojima's concept. According to Shinkawa, Solid Snake's physique in this particular installment was based on Jean-Claude Van Damme, while his facial appearance was based on Christopher Walken's. The characters were completed by polygonal artists using brush drawings and clay models by Shinkawa, and according to Kojima, quote, "The ninja's cloaking effect is the result of a bug. Of course, it wasn't totally coincident since we wanted that effect anyway, but we did get a somewhat unexpected result," unquote. Kojima wanted greater interaction with objects and the environment, such as allowing the player to hide bodies in a storage compartment. He also wanted a full orchestra right next to the player. A system which made modifications such as tempo and texture to the currently playing track as well, instead of switching to another pre-recorded track. Although these features could not be achieved, they were implemented in Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty.
The DARPA chief. He's the green dot. Hurry and rescue him.
The game was developed by a staff of 20 people, a small team for such a major title. Kojima preferred to have a smaller team so that he gets to know everyone in the team, and then he knows what they're working on and can know if anyone is sick or unhappy. So good guy Hideo. The team size did not expand to full strength until September 1996, and initially there was only a single programmer working on the game's code. Just one, that's phenomenal. A gameplay demo of Metal Gear Solid was first released to the public in 1996 at the Tokyo Game Show, and was later shown at E3 in 1997 as a short video. The 1997 version had several differences, including a more controllable camera and blue-coloured vision cones. The demo generated a significant buzz and positive reviews at the event. For its game design emphasizing stealth and strategy, like earlier Metal Gear games, its presentation, and the unprecedented level of real-time 3D graphical detail for the PlayStation. The enthusiastic response to the game at E3 took Kojima by surprise, and increased his expectations for the game's performance in the American market. The game's Japanese release was originally planned, as previously said, in late 1997, but was delayed to 1998. It was also playable for the first time at the Tokyo Game Show in 1998 and released the same year in Japan, with an extensive promotional campaign, television and magazine advertisements, in-store samples, and demo giveaways contributed a total of $8 million in promotional costs. The musical score of Metal Gear Solid was composed by Konami's in-house musicians, including Kazuki Muraoka, Hiroyuki Togo, Takanari Ishiyama, Lianhuan Myung, and Maki Kirioka. Composer and lyricists Rika Moranaka provided a song called "The Best Is Yet to Come" for the game's ending credit sequence. The main theme was composed by Tapi Iwase from the Konami Kukeiha Club. Music played in-game has a synthetic feel, with an increased pace and introduction of strings during tense moments, with a looping style endemic to video games. Overtly cinematic music with stronger orchestral and choral elements appears in cutscenes. The soundtrack was released officially on September 23, 1998 under the King's Records label. For the commercial performance prior to its North American release, an estimated 12 million demos for the game were distributed in 1998. It became one of the most rented games in the United States and topped sales charts in the United Kingdom and Japan. PC Data, which tracks sales in the United States, reported that Metal Gear Solid sold 1.06 million copies and earned over $51 million, equivalent to $86 million in 2021, in revenue during 1998 alone. That's staggering. That's absolutely staggering. This made it into the country's 5th best-selling PlayStation release of 1998 and the 3rd highest grossing in PlayStation title that year. In the UK, it was the 3rd best-selling video game of 1999. In Germany, it received the Platinum Award for the Verband der Unterhaltungssoftware Deutschland, or VUD, in June 1999 for sales above 200,000 copies within several months, and it became the year's 2nd best-selling PlayStation game. By early 2001, it had sold 6 million units worldwide, including 1 million in Japan and approximately 5 million units in the United States and Europe. It went on further to sell 6.6 million units worldwide by 2002, and by 2004 the original release had sold 5.51 million, and Integral, or the VR missions, had sold 1.27 million for a combined 6.78 million units worldwide. Its aggregate score on Metacritic for the PlayStation was 94 out of 100 and 83 out of 100 on the PC. The 94 out of 100 on the PlayStation makes sense because of a few features, for example the Psycho Mantis scene, which is an iconic gaming moment. We'll discuss that shortly. With regards to its retrospective legacy, Metal Gear Solid is credited with popularising the stealth game genre. The idea of the player being unarmed and having to avoid being seen by enemies rather than fight them has been used in many games since. It's sometimes acclaimed as being a film as much as a game due to the lengthy cutscenes and complicated storyline. IGN called it the founder of the stealth genre. The game is often considered one of the best for the PlayStation and was featured in Best Video Games lists by Computer and Video Games in 2001, by Electronic Gaming Monthly and Game Informer in 2001, by Retro Gamer in 2004, by Game FAQs and Game Pro in 2005. Also includes Famitsu Hyper Magazine in 2001 called it probably the single best game on the PlayStation. And quite frankly, I would probably very much agree with that. It's highly up there as probably one of the top 5 PlayStation games. And probably one of the best games of all time, if I'm perfectly honest. In 2002, IGN ranked it as the best PlayStation game ever, stating that just the demo for the game had more gameplay in it than most finished titles. That's 100% true. I played that demo in 1997 so many times, I think I burned a hole in the disc. IGN gave it the Best Ending and Best Villain awards. In 2005, it placed it in 19th on their list of the top 100 games, saying that it was a game that truly felt like a movie. Guinness World Records awarded Metal Gear Solid with a record for the most innovative use of a video game controller for the boss fight with Psycho Mantis. Okay, very interesting. I can see why. Never seen that happen before, to be honest. Kind of breaking the fourth wall in a way, which Metal Gear Solid was always good for. In 2010, PC Magazine ranked it as the 7th in the list of the most influential video games of all time, citing its influence on stealthy titles such as Splinter Cell and Assassin's Creed. In 2012, Time named it one of the 100 greatest video games of all time, and G4 TV ranked it as the 45th top video of all time. According to OneUp.com, Metal Gear Solid's cinematic style continues to influence modern action games such as Call of Duty. Metal Gear Solid, as well as its sequel MGS2, was featured in the Smithsonian American Art Museum's exhibition, The Art of Video Games in 2012. During August 2015 as well, Eurogamer reanalyzed the game's technical and overall impact and claimed that Metal Gear Solid had been nothing less than the first modern video game. And I will toast that as well. I agree, 120%. In September 2015, Metal Gear Solid was voted the best original PlayStation game of all time by PlayStation.blogs users. Fair play, chaps, fair play. Now time for some trivia on Metal Gear Solid. I'm looking at thegamer.com and I'm going through a list of theirs, and quite insightful, I will say. So let's start at the beginning. Development began in 1995. Apparently the development didn't start until 1995. We've already discussed this earlier. But it spent 3 years in production, which was quite long for the generation. I would agree with that as well. The first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater game, for example, was in development for barely a year. But you've got to be honest, Metal Gear Solid has got such extensive gameplay mechanics than games at that time, by far. Hideo Kojima used Legos to design levels. There's a little picture here. But as you can see, he was using Lego bricks to design levels. That's genius. The man is a genius. Somebody please give him a Genius Award, because he's absolutely outstanding. Don't even get me started on Silent Hill. We'll go there another day, but wow. That's just, wow. See, a normal person would use paper. Hideo uses Lego. Awesome. As we mentioned in the video, Snake is modelled after Christopher Walken and Jean-Claude Van Damme, who of course were highly prominent actors in the 90s. I guess they still are to some extent as well. The release of the VR missions was separate, of course, mostly because that the integral version was a combination of the two games. The interesting thing about the VR missions is they sort of... You would kind of want to play it before you play Metal Gear Solid, and that's what I was interested in when I first played it. There's a few missions on the original PlayStation game, 1997, but it's just not quite the same as the VR missions. So if you've never played the VR missions, I recommend you do go and play them. There was apparently a Japanese radio drama. Apparently numerous adaptations of Metal Gear Solid with the 2 novelizations and the graphic novel. Before all of that, though, there was a Japanese radio drama set after the events from the PS1 game. That's quite cool. It spans 12 episodes and uses the original Japanese cast for all returning characters, and of course it's mostly considered non-canon regarding, of course, Metal Gear Solid 2's subsequent release. This was Hideo Kojima's first Western-released Metal Gear game. While in 1997 Metal Gear came out in the West on the NES, the version differs from the MSX2 home computer release, and the sequel Metal Gear 2 never had any release until 2006 Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. Apparently the sequel of Snake's Revenge, which was non-canon, was made with no involvement from the series creator. It makes Metal Gear Solid really the first entry in the series released into the West with direct input from Hideo Kojima. So that's the lore covered. What we're going to do now is we're going to jump into the gameplay player experience of the game, starting at the very beginning. Let's go. The game starts off with this fancy looking menu where you can jump straight in or do a bit of VR training, as you can see above. Some trippy intros there. Can you see the background? That was pretty cool. When you launch the game, you're treated with an instant cinematic. And given the time that this was released, it was incredibly immersive for sure. Now, when you dock into this port here, that's when the story begins. So as you can see, he's just bobbing up and down in the water, with the GNM soldier looking pretty shady. It goes through a lengthy credits sequence at the beginning, creating the cinematic introduction to the game. The game's dialogue takes place mostly through codec calls, but of course through the cinematics as well. Over the course of the game, you'll get new context that you can speak to for extra experience or advice on the mission that you're on. For example, when you get into the crawl space above at the first level, you will speak to Master Miller. Mei Ling is there to save your game. You'll additionally have mysterious codec calls from like Deep Throw and from Merrill, for example, every once in a while, but those will go cold. When the game gets towards the end as well, the whole dynamic changes and you won't be able to rely on the kernel, for example, but that's at the very end. The gameplay mechanics are stealth orientated. You will have to hide behind cover to make sure that the enemies don't see you and avoid things that can make noise, such as that puddle on the floor there, which will alert the guards to your presence if you make a noise with it. You'll have to wait for the guards to do certain maneuvers to move around certain places, observe their patterns before you can move past, and then wait for certain sequences to take place. In this example here, the guard on the right is being a bit of an annoyance to me because I'm trying to get behind that forklift truck to get onto the elevator. But as you can see, the guard moves around quite a lot.
Wow, you must be crazy to fly high.
The game gives you additional support in the form of codec calls, usually brief you on individual situations as you're going through to help give you a guide. It introduces characters such as Mei Ling, who is in charge of your radar and saving data. As you can see here, she is introducing herself to Snake, who then begins to flirt with her, as you can see.
What's wrong?
Nothing. I just didn't expect a world-class designer of military technology to be so cute.
You're just flattering me.
No, I'm serious. Well, I know I won't be bored for the next 18 hours.
Come on. I can't believe I'm being hit on by the famous Solid Snake. But I'm surprised.
The game will give you certain foreshadowing moments at multiple places in the game, a few plot twists to keep you attracted to the game whilst you're playing it. I won't say too much, but this is one of them. For those of you who know, you know. For those of you who don't, play the game and find out. It's a great twist. This guy here, for example, Master Miller, former mentor of Snake.
Campbell told me about the situation here. I thought I might be of some use.
There's no one I'd rather have in a foxhole than you.
Well, I know lots about survival in a harsh environment. I've lived in Alaska longer than you, so call me if you have any questions about the flora or fauna out here.
As the game progresses, the gameplay mechanics change slightly with the introduction of new environments, different levels for the player to move Snake around on. Certain platforms as well, these for example make noise when Snake runs into them, and you will have additional blockages and obstructions such as the surveillance camera, which you will again, like the guards, wait until the field cone of vision changes so you can move around. You'll also have multiple enemy placements at once, which will sometimes bisect each other's patrol routes, creating confusion, especially when the guards decide to change direction and move back where they've just come from. For example here, crawling under the tank to get past both of them, to the elevator to get to the DARPA chief on the first floor. The game heavily relies on cinematics. Using in-game footage, the game will pan certain environments that you will encounter, or have already encountered, to develop the story, narrated by the actors of the characters that you're currently in conversation with. In this particular example, Metal Gear Rex is displayed, which is a game area at the very end. But the whole game uses this mechanic thoroughly throughout the game, not just with in-game footage, but it will also use footage from the real world and use it as a kind of lore building tool to develop and enhance the game's storyline.
Naomi, the chief.
The whole narrative of the game is to always keep you on edge and to not trust those who you believe you should trust. In this exchange, for example, the Colonel is arguing with Snake about why the DARPA chief has encountered a heart attack. The suspicion rises from Snake as the game progresses, and the tension is played out progressively as each situation becomes more dire. As the pinch grows around Campbell, he eventually starts to divulge certain information to Snake, which again I will not ruin the plot, but serves as a great tool of the game's storytelling. You'll also have these in-game cinematics here, not just for lore, but during the actual gameplay. For this example, Snake has just encountered Meryl for the first time, an iconic moment.
Can you shoot me, rookie?
Careful. I'm no rookie.
Liar. That nervous glance, that scared look in your eyes. They're rookie's eyes if I ever saw them. You've never shot a person, am I right?
You talk too much.
Combat in the game isn't always fixed like this particular situation. This situation serves as a tutorial for the player in the later game stages where you will encounter multiple encounters with enemies and have to engage them in combat. This just provides a brief little experience for you to get used to the aiming mechanics and the assault that you will receive. When you're playing earlier on in the game, when you get into an encounter, you will have maybe one or two, but later on in the game you'll have to take on many assailants with heavier weaponry than the SOCOM pistol. The game does use weapons such as the SOCOM, the FAMAS, and a few other equipment items such as chaff grenades and stun grenades, as well as a few other equipment items. The game also foreshadows future encounters, for example this encounter with Psycho Mantis, which will take place in the next 2 chapters.
Good girl. Just like that.
The game can be saved by calling 140.96 and calling Mei Ling, who we've previously mentioned. She will offer to save your game. Upon doing so, she will give you a quote, either from Chinese philosophy or Western philosophy, as she describes in this video. It serves as an additional storytelling purpose, giving you a bit of background on Mei Ling, but also helping you develop your, shall we say, intellectual prowess a little bit, with giving you some hints and tips that can be applied in the real world. A nice little touch there by Hideo Kojima.
Kinda keeps me in touch. I'll share some more quotes with you if you like.
I'm looking forward to it. But to tell you the truth, I'd like to learn more about you.
Well, I'll think about it.
The mechanic of the boss fight is very original. I would say it is still very applicable to the time frame in which it was created. Obviously there isn't much realism with it, but then again, what do you expect? It's supposed to be an action game that's fun, not realistic. In this particular first boss fight, you combat a Revolver Ocelot, who sports a Colt single-action army revolver, hence his name. You'll then have to fight him in this closed space here, avoiding damaging the C4, which is strapped to the walls in the middle, and of course injuring the hostage who you're supposed to be saving, Kenneth Baker. Metal Gear Solid also introduces whimsical characters and new placements of characters as the story develops into each subsequent chapter. As I said previously, it will sometimes put characters from future chapters into previous chapters, just to tease you as to what's coming up next. For example, here you have the ninja who comes in and slices Revolver Ocelot's hand off. The character, the ninja, will serve as a plot element throughout the rest of the game, and just adds further development of story arcs for Solid Snake, as well as some backstory for a few other characters as well that I won't mention to avoid spoilers. The replayability of the game is quite substantial. As you progress through it, you'll find that you'll unlock certain key cards, which will grant you access to doors that you may have already passed but couldn't get into previously. For example, here when we first came to the B2 floor of the hangar, you were unable to get into this door and access these items. Now that we can use other items such as the thermal goggles to go through and find these invisible lasers which will blow Snake up if he hits them. You can also use the cigarettes, of course, to find them. But the cigarettes, for example, damage your health, which of course dissuades the player from wanting to smoke, which was a nice little touch by Hideo, I feel. An amazing mechanic of the game is that to progress further from this part with the tank hangar, you actually have to purposefully go and find an actual codec number from the back of the video game case, which was an absolutely mind-numbing experience as a child, particularly when you don't know what to do. There's no video guides unless you go to the shop and buy one from the shop and you've bought the correct month, and there's no internet. Well, there is internet, but it's very limited and not easy to access. So usually the only way you find this information out is from your friends, who probably would have gone through each and every single codec.
My eyes.
They're not soldiers' eyes.
And they're rookies' eyes, right?
No, they're beautiful, compassionate eyes.
Oh, just what I'd expect from the legendary Solid Snake.
As you can see as well in this particular sequence, Snake is very fond of flirting with the ladies on his codec. So, fair play, Snake.
Why did you look so surprised when you saw my face?
After Metal Gear Solid's release, there was the release of the VR missions, and as a part of a 2-pack game, Metal Gear Solid Integral. The game follows the narrative of virtual reality missions, which serve to help Snake develop his skills in combat. Of course, when you're actually playing, it just helps you go through a few little fantasy situations and scenarios where you can hone your skills as well as gain some target practice. So for example, here in the SOCOM missions, you'll have to forgive my playstyle here, it's been about 20 years since I played this game, but you can see the mechanics of that involved here in this video. The game isn't just limited to shooting, it also includes sneaking, as well as some additional game modes such as advanced mode, where you can do some unique scenarios and situations. I will cover the VR missions at a later date. The game did get a remaster in 2004 for the Nintendo GameCube, dubbed Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes. Of course, emphasis on Solid Snake and Liquid Snake respectively. The graphics were updated to the game engine of Metal Gear Solid 2, and some people thought that it wasn't a good upgrade. As you can see with the codec here, it changed a little bit, and the overall reviews for that game were not as highly rated as the original. Some fans felt that the atmosphere was taken out of the game a little bit, but personally I think the longevity changed as well because of the graphical update, so it's hit and miss.
Try to knock her out.
The game also continues the original feature of Psycho Mantis, reading your memory card to see your actions. It can also read the games that you've played, and then tease you about the games that you have played, such as Castlevania for example. It also features the same feature as the PlayStation 1 game, where you would have to change your controller to controller port 2, so that Psycho Mantis can't read your mind. That also changed in the GameCube to the 4th controller port, just to again throw players off once more, which I thought was quite funny. The legacy of Metal Gear Solid and its impact on popular culture is quite profound. There have been memes produced over the years. In particular, in the first scene, "A Hind D, Colonel, what's a Russian gunship doing here?" was used in many different forums to imply as a sort of, you know, posting to just throw people off for no apparent reason, as a form of trolling. You would find it in random locations. Some of these examples are memes that have been created, or just spin-off little videos that people have made, such as Egoraptor's Metal Gear Awesome. You also have a few Metal Gear Solid collaborations that happened on Newgrounds, and they're still being made, these little snippets and videos, especially to modern memes. For example, the Dr. Livesey meme, which was in 2022 I believe, by Parametric Memes here, who did a Metal Gear Solid version of it, which is quite funny. You should go and watch that. Well everyone, that's been an episode of Retroware covering Metal Gear Solid 1. I hope you enjoyed that little mini documentary. I'll be going over a lot of classic and retro games from previously, I would say, the 90s and the noughties is the games that I'll cover. But do stay tuned for more. I will make a few of them in the future. If you have any suggestions about games that you like from the past you'd like me to cover and do some commentary on, please let me know in the comments. Speaking of which, remember to like, comment and subscribe, and share the video if you can as well, that'd be great. And I'll see you all guys for the next video.
A Hind D, Colonel, what's a Russian gunship doing in a Superfly gaming video?
Well, Snake, it is a documentary on Metal Gear Solid, and it's kind of expected.
Don't talk to me, Colonel. I'm still hungover.